Welcome to the Jewish Federation of Ottawa's third election roundtable. Today we're meeting with candidates for the NDP, Sean Devine in Nepean and Angela McEwen in Ottawa Centre. Welcome to both of you and thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Pollowin. I'm the past chair of the Jewish Federation of Ottawa and the chair of our Communications and Community Relations Committee. Thank you to the community members who have joined us this morning. This roundtable will last no more than 1 hour and the format will be as follows. Both candidates will each have 2 minutes for opening remarks. My apologies, but this time limit will be vigorously enforced. With appreciation to the members of the Communications and Community Relations Committee, they have prepared questions on issues of concern to our community. And both candidates will have an opportunity to have a question for our candidates. Please submit them using the Q&A function to the moderator, and our Federation CEO, Andrea Friedman, will moderate a Q&A after we finish the formal question. After the Q&A, each candidate will have a brief opportunity for closing remarks. Let's start with opening remarks. Perhaps, Angela, you can get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael, and thanks for everyone joining us so early on a Monday morning. I'd like to begin by acknowledging, as we always do, that we are here today. I am here today on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and we are grateful to them and their traditions. Like many of the people that I've been speaking to on the doorsteps of Ottawa Centre, I've grown even more concerned about the state of inequality in our community and across the country throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Wages are flat. The cost of housing is skyrocketing. Public transit is expensive and inaccessible. And our government continues to shell out fossil fuel subsidies and give tax breaks to wealthy companies that have only increased their profits during the pandemic. But it doesn't have to be this way. As your next member of parliament for Ottawa Centre, I will fight for our most vulnerable neighbors by demanding more affordable housing in Ottawa Centre, protecting our trees and our green spaces, advocating for funding for frontline service organizations, protecting seniors by implementing national standards for long-term care, and standing up for our community against growing hate and anti-Semitism. There are those who want you to think that it can't be done, but I know we can make the right choices to ensure that we come out of this pandemic with a society that takes care of each other. That's what I'm fighting for, and thank you for having us here today.
Thank you. Sean, over to you.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here. So this is my second time running as candidate for federal office. I ran in 2015 for the NDP here in Nepean, and I got 8% of the vote. But I know that I persuaded a lot more than 8% of those people that the NDP was the party that would best serve our common interests. And I know that many more than 8% believe that I was the individual they wanted as their member of parliament. People did not vote with their conscience then, nor did they vote with their heart. They voted out of fear, and extreme, irrational things happen when people act out of fear. The 2015 election taught me that serving my community was something I needed to do. Short of being a good husband and a father, there is no higher calling. Immediately after that election, I joined my community association where I have served for 6 years, 4 years as president. I have worked harder for my community as a non-paid volunteer without a budget than most elected officials. 2 years ago, I won the United Way's Community Builder of the Year award because of the work I did organizing my community's recovery from the 2018 tornado. Now, I am a member, we are all members of the first generation in history that is about to hand down a worse situation to the next generation. It is not a proud distinction. to our children, to our grandchildren, whether it is jobs, whether it is climate, housing, our divisive society. Today's youth are fully aware that they have been given a raw deal. Thankfully, they are fighting for what they need because they have hope, because hopelessness is not an option. There is a reason why the vast majority of young people and a growing number of the rest of us want more NDP voices in
5
Parliament.
seconds.
It is because we are listening and because we are acting in a manner that is proportionate to the emergency we are facing. I'm running because, in the words of my predecessor, hope is better than fear, love is better than anger, and optimism is better than despair. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you, Angela. Okay, so we've had a couple of unfortunate last-minute cancellations, so you're going to hear a little bit more from me this morning than otherwise might have been the case. So I'll ask the first couple of questions. So let's start with anti-Semitism. It's foremost in our minds due to a dangerous rise in it. Every year, the Jewish Federation of Ottawa, our synagogues and other community institutions invest significant resources in security. While we're grateful for the federal security infrastructure program, it does not cover all of our security needs. Will you support a federal rebate to cover some of the costs of the unfortunately necessary security guards for places of worship and other sites targeted for hate? Who wants to take that first?
I'll jump in. So thank you for the question. I'm going to be the first to concede that I am always reluctant to commit to something that I don't know whether or not that very specific item is in our platform. So I always find it I find it lacks integrity for me to say yes, I'll make that happen if I don't know for sure if we're going to make that happen. But what I can tell you is what I can advocate for. My role is to listen to the voices of my constituency and advocate for our common good and for your good. What I can tell you is that the NDP absolutely is supportive of the rights of the Jewish community to protect their, oops, my timer just went off for no good reason. Sorry for that. To protect their security interests. One thing I do know is that the NDP is committing to a national action plan to combat anti-Semitism and other racial violence. And one thing I am particularly excited about is to put in place, I would be working with my relationships on City Council to ensure that Ottawa Police has a dedicated hate crime unit. So your security and peace of living needs are absolutely front and center in my heart. I would advocate as much as I can for that specific rebate, but I don't know enough about it to commit to it.
Thank you. Angela?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in. That is in our platform. That is something we're very concerned about, the growing number of hate crimes, specifically anti-Semitic hate crimes against places of worship. And so this is something that we know that we need to address in a number of ways, including, making sure that that the police have the appropriate tools to address it, and that there's work in collaboration with nonprofits to increase the reporting, because sometimes these crimes actually go unreported, and then that means that the people who are perpetrating them aren't addressed, and it grows, right, when we don't address it. We also want to convene a national working group to counter online hate and protect public safety, because again, that's another place where this hate grows. But we absolutely are concerned about the number of attacks on synagogues and mosques, and we want to help you protect yourselves, because everybody should be safe at their place of worship.
Okay, thank you. Sticking with the topic of anti-Semitism, education about the Holocaust is extremely important to prevent all future genocides. While some schools and districts do a good job on Holocaust education, unfortunately, many do not, and this is too important to leave to chance. Will you support the creation of a standardized national social studies curriculum that focuses on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and is informed by expert research. How about Angela, you take this one first.
Sure. Yes, we absolutely agree that rooting out anti-Semitism in Canada must include effective educational campaigns. So including curriculum for schools, but also broader awareness programs and initiatives.
John?
Yes, absolutely. I would have no problem supporting that specific educational initiative you just referred to. I think the past, not only is there such a lack of education about Holocaust awareness, there are so many, like the past 6 months have taught us that Canadians had little awareness about the immense tragedy of residential school survivors. There has been a generational lack of education on so many historic legacies that we need to deal with front and center. So I would absolutely, for the sake of my kids and all of our kids, I would absolutely back any kind of educational initiative that put Holocaust awareness and tragedies like that front and center so that we learn far better from our history.
Okay, thank you. Now let's go to Tamara with a question.
Thanks, Michael, and good morning, Angela and Sean. Let's switch focus to international relations and the Jewish state of Israel. Israel is the only country in the world routinely criticized when she defends herself against terrorist attacks, as we saw most recently this past May. Will you urge the government to support Israel unequivocally when Israelis must defend themselves from terrorism?
So I guess I can jump in with that. So New Democrats are committed to making Canada a force for peace. For years, we have said that we are committed to working with both Palestinians and Israelis because they both have the right to live in safety and security. So we feel like Canada must play a stronger role in pushing for a resolution to this conflict. But I don't think that we can say we unequivocally support. We definitely support Israel. We support the people of Israel in needing to stay safe, but we also support the people of Palestine in their right to live in a safe place. So we want to work towards peace.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Tamara. I think I echo many of Angela's comments. We fully recognize that the Jewish people have experienced immeasurable suffering, their history. I think it's very important to acknowledge that and to acknowledge that the damage that can be done when that fact is ignored. I absolutely want to advocate for Canada to stand up to all of our partners and allies when they are under violent attack, for sure. I would say, though, that I have the same hesitation with the use of your word unequivocally, because unequivocally, without knowing further what that means, is too broad. I don't know what unequivocally would mean, and so I would say yes, absolutely. I support the right of the Jewish people to live in peace, and I would do whatever I can to try to advance peace through dialogue, through negotiation, and through listening to all sides and trying to advance their common interests.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, over to you. Jonathan Friedman. You're on mute,
muted,
Jonathan.
Sorry about that. Okay, Israeli citizens have always yearned for the desire to live in peace in our ancestral homeland. This is proven by public opinion poll after public opinion poll. Many Palestinians also crave the ability to live in peace. However, this hope is seriously impeded by policies of the Palestinian Authority encouraging terrorism. The Palestinian Authority's Martyr Fund incentivizes and rewards violence by paying imprisoned or injured Palestinians or families of those killed as a result of committing acts of violence against Israelis. Recipients of funds include mass murderers and families of suicide bombers. This perverse program works on a sliding scale. The bloodier the carnage, the greater the reward. The Palestinian payments for the pay-to-slay program are higher than the Palestinian minimum wages. Will you call on the PA to stop rewarding terrorists and cease their pay-to-slay program?
Yes, so the NDP wants to work to make sure that Hamas is not armed and that there are not arms being given to terrorists in Palestine, and to ensure that terrorism is not rewarded. We know that the people of Israel have faced violent threats from all sides. That it's not just Palestine. There are other neighboring states that are also very unfriendly and violently so. And so we want to make sure that the terrorists that are in Palestine aren't able. We want to stop the flow of money and or weapons to Hamas.
Sean?
I honestly wouldn't know how to answer any more than what Angela just said. I am not nearly as familiar with the specifics of what you just detailed. All that I can say that I know with conviction is that I want to advocate for a process where we bring both sides of a conflict to a table, and that we do everything we can to bring about de-escalation. That is the most principled position I can take on this.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to me, instead of our friend Ali Grant, who was unable to join us this morning, the next couple of questions. Changing focus, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, adopted by the UN on September the 13th, 2007, enshrined the rights that, quote, constitute the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of the indigenous peoples of the world, close quote. UNDRIP was adopted by 144 countries, with 11 abstentions and 4 countries voting against it, including Canada. Though this has been since been reversed, how will you work to prioritize and quickly implement UNDRIP to support Indigenous people living in Canada? Who wants to take this?
I'll jump in. I so very much appreciate the specifics of the question, because they demonstrate the level to which you care about such important issues. All I do know, and I hope I'm not wrong in saying this, I very much would like to advance the causes of reconciliation through the application of UNDRIP. I believe with my heart that the NDP is a party that has that at its heart. The NDP would not have such committed advocates in this fight like Charlie Angus and Mamala Kagak if they didn't believe with their heart that the NDP was the party to best serve the needs of Indigenous peoples. I don't want to throw shade on other parties, but we all know the promises that have been made and not upheld when it comes to protecting our First Nations, to protecting our First Peoples. And I believe that the NDP would commit themselves far greater to any of those concerns.
Angela?
Thank you. Yeah, so we were very excited when the UNDRIP bill that Romeo Sagnesh started the push for in 2015 actually received royal assent this summer. And so we want to make sure that it's not just symbolic, right? So that symbolic thing is important. That piece is very important, but then we also want to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action in order to make it real. The murdered and missing women, Indigenous women and girls. I can never remember the acronym, I'm sorry. That there was a commission there with calls, and a lot of that deals with, first of all, addressing the underfunding to Indigenous communities, making sure there's an Indigenous-led housing strategy for Indigenous people, getting rid of the boil water advisories, but also making sure that there's money for ongoing maintenance and operations of water so that the boil water advisories don't keep coming back. So the NDP is the only party that has put in our platform the $15 billion that the Human Rights Tribunal has ordered be paid out to survivors of residential schools. It's not that much money for individual people. It's about $40,000 each, but there are so many people that have been affected by residential schools that it's a large number of people that will be getting that. And that's a first step. I think the important thing going forward is to work on a nation-to-nation basis, using more Indigenous-led initiatives, because the charity approach doesn't work. We need a partnership approach.
Okay, thanks. Switching focus yet again. During times of chronic shortages in Canada's blood supply, LGBTQ2+ Canadians want to help save lives. Unfortunately, Canadian Blood Services prohibits many of them from donating blood unless they have been celibate for at least 3 months. Will you support an end to the blood ban on LGBTQ2+ donations? I always have a problem getting that one right. Donations, and instead use scientific screening methods to keep our blood supply safe.
Yeah, that's a very easy yes. The NDP has been fighting to end the blood ban. It's not scientific, and it hurts our supply. We need that blood.
Yeah, I'll be quick here too. I absolutely would support ending that blood ban, and frankly, I don't understand why that blood ban has been in place for as long as it has. I have a friend on Twitter, member of the LGBTQ+ community, and I remember daily he was putting out a tweet. Justin Trudeau, this is day number 817 that you have not repealed this ban. Justin Trudeau, this is day number 818 that you have not repealed this ban. And he was very persistent. And what he just kept on reinforcing in me was just how much of this needed supply was being denied for no good reason. It feels like a tragic and biased loss of life-saving opportunity. Yeah, that would be a no-brainer for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Now to Ian Sadinsky.
Thank you, Michael. Sean, in your opening remarks, I thought I was listening to my life story. I used to live in Nepean. I had a wife, 4 kids, and 1 car, and a carpool. And I knew the stress of getting to an 8 o'clock in the morning meeting. So I thank you for coming and for your commitment. Angela, you may recall that you met me on a doorstep, because I now live in Ottawa Centre, and you asked me, and I gave you a mini sermon on the meaning of a mezuzah.
Yes.
But it was more intended for your young workers, so they know that that symbol actually meant something, and that our people go back many, many years, the original Indigenous people. So I've got a question that's more local, and it has to do with housing, which I know you also mentioned, but this has a specific question on housing. The National Housing Strategy, or NHS, includes important commitments to fund up to 2,400 new housing units for people with developmental disabilities. You may have heard of Tamir, which is a beneficiary agency of the Jewish Federation. Will you continue the National Housing Strategy and increase capital and operating funding investments for ethnocultural affordable housing initiatives?
So I think we want to make some changes to the overall national housing strategy, but not that piece of it. The piece of it that we wanted to change was the part where we're subsidizing developers to build housing that is not affordable. but we want to keep, I know that Tamir, so I've been knocking on doors in Ottawa West and Nepean in previous elections, in the provincial election in 2018. And we actually encountered some people that were running those much needed services to the community. And so, yes, we want to support people who are doing that work and doing that work in culturally appropriate ways, because that's really important for sure. Yeah, we want to add to, so our housing strategy is we want to actually also build across Canada 500,000 new units that are co-op, not-for-profit, or publicly owned housing. So there might actually be room for not-for-profits to get in on that piece as well, and for us to subsidize the building of new not-for-profit housing for people with developmental needs, or other specific not-for-profit housing.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to move.
Oh, do you want my answer on that?
Oh, I apologize, Sean.
No problem. No
Go
problem.
right ahead.
It must be because my previous answers have been so boring or not effective that you wanted to skip over. But I'll try to do better in this instance right now. I won't repeat what Angela said. I'll just say three things. One, yes, absolutely. We will do all in our power to address the housing need. I am hearing from my young volunteers, as well as from 6 out of 10 people that I knock on the door, that this is a crisis. Two, I hope by this point you have seen the news of the NDP's costed platform. I beg you. It is a bold, unprecedented, courageous investment in public spending, and the myth we are also trying to dispel, based on the revenues that we anticipate collecting, our deficits will not be as high as our opponents. This is the budget, this is the goal, this is the ambitious public spending that we need to meet this emergency. The third thing I wanted to say on the issue of housing, what I liked about what you said, Ian, was, will we address housing needs specific to communities? One thing that is very, very important to me, and one thing that I've always enjoyed doing, is engaging with communities to identify what their needs are. Ottawa has a master plan in the works. We have to address the housing needs of hundreds, tens of thousands of people coming over the next 30 years. And the best way for us to do this for all, to have a viable and sustainable and well-planned future, is that we build smart, sensible communities. If we can do that by addressing housing needs to meet the specific needs of a community, I think we will build better communities. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. We're now going to move to the moderated Q&A, and Andrea will be our moderator.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you, Angela and Sean, for being with us here today. So we've had a few questions submitted into the chat. If anybody else has more questions, please feel free to send them to me. So the first question is for both of you, and it's a rather pointed one. It's to please explain where you stand on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, otherwise known as BDS.
I hope this isn't insulting to anyone. I frankly don't know enough about the issue to have a clear position on it. I'm sure that the NDP has a position on it, and I will assume that many of your listeners know what the position on it is. There are other issues for which I am quite knowledgeable of, and I hope we get an opportunity to discuss. I don't know enough about this issue.
So the NDP position is that BDS is not a solution. It can't replace good faith efforts to negotiate a sustainable and just solution to the ongoing conflict. And New Democrats are committed to actively working towards a just and lasting solution between Israel and Palestine by supporting negotiations that respect human rights and international law. And yeah.
So I think thank you for that. I'm going to maybe ask it one more time a little bit differently, because I do think the the people who are trying to make their decisions are also trying to understand where their personal candidates, not just where a party platform
Okay.
stands. So I'd be really curious to know your personal perspective on BDS.
Sean, do you want to go?
Well, then let's sit down for an hour and tell me more about it, and then I'll tell you. Like when it comes to, I can't say it any better than I've said it before. When it comes to these kinds of situations, all that I believe I and the NDP want to do is to do what we can to bring about a de-escalation of violence from both sides, to bring about a negotiated peace from all sides of a conflict, and to support any measures that will help us get there, that above all, and I suppose this is fundamental to it, that above all respect human rights and the rights of people to live in peace and prosperity. I'm going to have to leave it to your listeners to divine, no pun intended, but to divine what I mean from that position. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that individuals certainly have the right to not purchase goods from a specific state if they think that, or a specific company, if they feel that companies are not, if that's not in line with their personal views. I don't think that the state has a role in saying one way or the other. So we certainly wouldn't make it Canadian law. But I don't actually, I don't know that there's a role for Canadian politicians in doing anything one way or the other about BDS. I think that as far as I understand it, it's mostly people who are trying to themselves or their organizations boycott or divest to put pressure on the state of Israel to come to a negotiated solution. And I think that whether or not you agree with it, that is certainly something that is within people's rights to do.
Okay, thank you both. To switch gears again, another attendee is really curious to understand a little bit more about your position on StatsCan. So social service agencies across the city, really across the country, rely on information from StatsCan to figure out where service deliveries are needed and the like. A challenge is about asking about the religious question on every census. Would you advocate for StatsCan to gather data about religion?
This is definitely the first question I've heard on StatsCan in this election. Angela, do you happen to even know if there is, I mean, I'll answer to the best of my ability. Angela, do you know if the NDP has a specific position on this?
So in general, our position that is that more disaggregated data is better, and it allows us to make better policy. But then there's also, I think that communities have concerns about how that data is used and if it's going to be used in a positive way. So as an economist who uses census data, it is quite useful, I think, for us in terms of providing services. So if you could recognize that there's a growing Jewish population in a town, it might be helpful then to reach out to that community as a politician, right? As even a municipal politician, to say, oh, we should be contacting this community to make sure that they're safe, because we want to have that conversation about making sure that people are feeling comfortable actually reporting hate crimes, that there's a connection there. And so that is how I would like to have that data, so that we can use it to do that type of outreach. You could argue potentially that data is not necessary to do that outreach if you have a really proactive a government who's always in contact with their community. But I do think that overall it's useful to have.
Yeah,
than less.
if I can jump back in, and I really think it's fantastic to have the perspective of an economist on this panel and among our NDP candidates, because economists will be able to clearly demonstrate the immense value that can be had in nuanced data. That said, I do recognize the concern that comes from the question. as candidates, we are collecting so much data. I have a spreadsheet that has so many categories of data because that information can be useful to help us achieve our objectives. But I fully recognize that for certain people, the revealing of data can pose a threat to them. I can certainly see how that applies to racialized people, that handing over that kind of data will either lead to a recrimination against them or to a policy that will not serve their interests. That said, if we believe in the good of people and if we believe in the good of government, I echo what Angela said, that that collection of data can help us put together policies and responses that will better serve the community. So to answer your question, Andrea, I'm not sure if I'd be prepared to eliminate the collection of religion-based data. However, I would certainly try to put in measures and ensure that that data is collected in a way that is not only responsible, but is not used for the detriment of others. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I think actually it would be an important element to any conversation. So we've talked about having experts and roundtables and conversations around how do we address hate and anti-Semitism. And so that would be something actually to bring up with the community. And if the community, through that consultation actually says, this is not a useful way to address hate, then I think it makes sense for us to not collect it. And if it's the other way, I think that is something that we really deserve very careful consideration, especially from the community affected, because we know that there's a history of that data being used badly against Indigenous people, against other groups of people. So there's certainly a question of trust there. And if that trust is not there, then we shouldn't collect the data or even try, right? You have to build the trust first, I think.
Okay. Thank you for that. The last question that's been submitted is, how will you strengthen Canada's COVID recovery, and will you maintain current funding levels for social services?
Yes, I hope that you are all aware. So thank you for that question. Any question that pertains to our plan for how to, and God, I'm speaking in front of The Economist. I can't believe I just made that logo. So Angela, I apologize for speaking before The Economist, but you can bat a home run after I'm done here. I hope everyone is aware that the NDP had a very, very, very strong and active role to play in pressuring the Liberal government to deliver the amount of social safety net during COVID. From what I understand, the 2,000 a month CERB would not have been at that level had it not been for NDP pressure on the government. From what I understand, the 75% rent and wage subsidy would not have been nearly at the level it was at had it not been for NDP influence. NDP, I believe, has a extremely faithful commitment to using the power of government to collect and distribute revenues for the social safety of those who need it. Angela.
Absolutely, Sean. That's right. So I work as the senior economist at the Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE. And we were part of an external group pushing the government to improve CERB, improve the wage subsidy, and they took some of our recommendations. They didn't take all of them, but I think we definitely, with the NDP, worked to make those programs better. And that's one of the advantages of minority governments, is that you can have those conversations and work to develop a better policy. In terms of here in Ottawa Centre, so I've put on my website a list of 10 local priorities, and one of those 10 priorities is more funding for frontline service organizations, because I know that the pressure on those organizations has been immense over the past 18 months. We know that food banks saw more people needing them, and they had less capacity to do it because of the public health restrictions. So we definitely want to provide more funding to those frontline groups. And we know that there have been day programs for people that would normally have happened that aren't happening. And so there's more pressure. There's more people actually in the streets during the day that need access to services. And I've heard from business improvement associations, they feel uncomfortable calling the police when it's somebody that is ill, but they don't have anyone else to call. And so I think we need to build that alternative social safety net in Ottawa and make sure that people aren't falling through the cracks, that we have appropriate funding to respond to the people who need our help. And in terms of a recovery from COVID, so in our platform, we are talking about investing more in healthcare, specifically in training more nurses and support staff in hospitals, because people who are working in healthcare are burnt out. We're talking about investing in building more housing that creates jobs and housing for people, so that we think that that's really a really important part of the recovery. And then we're also talking about climate change. So we want to invest in public transit to make it more affordable. We want to bring in a Crown Corporation to replace Greyhound, so that we'll have bus service between towns, make it easier to visit family or for people in rural areas to come in to see the doctor. And that also helps address climate change because we're using cars or planes less. And so those are the types of investments that we think are really important. Also, we're going to continue the plan for childcare. That's a really important piece coming out of the pandemic, to make sure that we have affordable childcare, because families with young kids, I'm sure Sean can tell that my daughter's 13, so she's very self-sufficient. But I've felt so bad for my colleagues that have little ones and are trying to juggle everything during the pandemic. And so making sure that we have those affordable childcare spaces for people. And that they're safe. So we want to make sure that schools are safe, and long-term care. We're talking about bringing long-term care into the public sector and increasing funding for it and setting strong national standard, because part of the problem with long-term care was actually that the private sector long-term care homes were understaffed, and they didn't have sufficient staff in place to actually provide the level of care that was necessary. And that was devastating for many people throughout the pandemic. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen again, that basically we're investing in taking better care of each other. And I think that is the best way to kind of take us out of the pandemic and build a strong foundation for our economy.
Thank you both for that. I'm going to ask one follow-up question, since both of you mentioned the CERB. Unquestionably, that got people who needed it the most support when they needed it the most. What I'm also hearing from our small business owners who simply can't find people to work anymore, and you see help wanted signs all over the city. From your perspective, what if any modifications need to be made to the CERB to get the help to people who need it, but allow businesses to flourish?
Yeah, so we're putting in place a hiring benefit to make it easier for employers to increase wages a little bit. We're also finding that a lot of the people who had previously worked service jobs are just a little gun shy. And so they actually moved from those sectors into different sectors during the pandemic, because they knew there was another lockdown coming, or they're afraid there's another lockdown coming. So people moved from food services or tourism into retail, like grocery stores or pharmacies, that kind of thing, or people actually moved back home with their parents. And so they're not in town anymore to do that work. Or the other thing we're also hearing is actually that young people who are going to school, their parents are telling them they don't want them to work because they don't think it's safe yet. And so making sure that as many people as possible get vaccinated and that we continue to use masks where it's appropriate, I think is the best way to get people feeling like it's safe to go back to work, because this is those two factors, that people have moved into other occupations, and that that normal labor force that wants to work part-time and pick up extra jobs, that they're actually not feeling like it's safe to do right now because their parents are telling them don't. That when they feel it's safe to go back to work, then they will. And unfortunately, it's really tough for employers working in those industries, because they have no control over whether or not other people get vaccinated. So I think this is where federal leadership is really important in making sure that we're reducing the barriers to vaccination, that we're being transparent and clear about what the current level, because like right now in Ottawa, numbers are really low. It probably would be safe to go to work. So we're making sure that we're communicating that information and getting everybody as vaccinated as possible. And then I think we'll start to see people returning to those jobs. The economic research shows that it's not people who are staying at home on CERB, that a lot of people in those industries are actually self-employed workers themselves who can't work. So my next door neighbor is a tattoo artist and he can't work because there's no one coming to tattoo. There are barbershops downtown Ottawa. The public servants aren't back, so there's no one for him to cut hair for. So he's still on CERB, actually. So the numbers of people on CERB have decreased dramatically from the height. And I think it's still necessary, especially for those self-employed service workers who are maybe going to go bankrupt, actually. So it's really tough for a lot of people right now.
Thank you.
Can I jump in there? Oh, so did the screen just freeze? Andrea,
No, you're good. You're good.
I hate to use the word unprecedented, but COVID has definitely been an unprecedented event that has shifted the priorities of living for everyone. And I fully recognize that small business is having a challenge. My brother's restaurant is one of them. He can't get people to work in the restaurant. And I fully recognize that small business is a central cog in the wheel that is going to get our economy going again. I do think that the NDP has several initiatives, like Angela just mentioned, that will make it easier for small business employers to pay higher wages because we will cover some of the costs. And let's admit it, the wage is a major incentive, if not the incentive, for small business employees. So one measure that the NDP is going to do is the NDP will cover the employer's portions of the EI and the CPP for all new hires and rehires. That NDP contribution will help the employer hopefully say, okay, I'll take that portion and give you an increased salary that will make the employee come back. But here's another large way. We can't talk about small business without looking at the economy as a whole and what it costs to run a small business. A lot of people, when I said shifting priorities, a lot of people have left their service job because they realize it does not provide the benefits that they need for a quality of life, including Medicare, including pharmacare coverage. If you are not covered by your small business employer for medications, you are often in a perilous position. The NDP is the only party that will genuinely commit to a universal pharmacare plan. Imagine the ability of a small business employee looking at their future to feel confident staying at this service job or this restaurant job or this retail job if they know as they get older they don't have to worry about paying the $25,000 per year for their kids' medication that I have to pay. A universal, and I get paid because my employer covers it, a small business situation that is underpinned by universal pharmacare will make it that much easier for people to retain employees.
Thank you. So thank you both very much for that. I'm going to turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. So, thanks to everyone for their questions. Now going to turn it over to Angela and Sean for brief closing remarks.
I think, Angela, you open, so I'll close and you can close after I close. So thank you very much for having this conversation. This has been one of the most rigorous conversations that we've had, and I very much appreciate that because it shows how much you care about your community and all of our communities. I'll close with this. So the last 6 years, since I ran for office, the last 6 years of the work that I've done in my community have shown to me and to my community the amount of good work that I can do when it comes to working with community and engaging and building for them. And I want to do that at the federal level, but I need to be empowered in order to do that. And so what do I want from you? I want power. I want you to give me the power to be able to activate myself at this level, because I truly believe that I can have a positive impact. If my past 6 years have shown anything, it's that I can build relationships and partnerships with community. My first goal, if I'm elected, is to sit down with leaders of communities across Nepean and across Ottawa, frankly, to have meetings to find out, what do you need, what do you want, what are your concerns, and how can we work together to achieve them. So thank you. And to everyone in Nepean listening in here, I really want your vote, and you will not be disappointed by it.
Love that direct pitch, Sean. You gotta just ask for it, hey? Yeah, thanks. I mean, throughout this campaign, I've been thinking a lot about what kind of country I want my daughter to grow up in. And I want her to grow up in a country where everyone has a roof over their head, and where workers are paid a living wage, and everyone has access to the healthcare and medicine that they need, and where violence isn't a constant daily threat for people. I think that is possible. I think we can work together towards that. And it's a combination of everything we talked about today. I think it's education, it's funding for safety, it's the social safety net for everyone, because when our neighbors are taken care of, we're all better off. And I really do appreciate I actually came to the roundtable for the Jewish community. I was a candidate in the 2019 election. And I do appreciate the broad range of subjects that the community deeply cares about and is deeply involved in. I feel like it is very much in line with NDP values. And as the Member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre, I'm ready to work with the Jewish community to ensure that everyone can feel safe and valued in our city. I know I've been knocking on doors and talking to people, and they said that they've lived in Canada their whole lives and they've never felt more scared than they do now. They've never seen more anti-Semitism than they do right now, and that's not okay. And we know that there are other groups of people. There's today potentially a protest at the Ottawa hospital. There are people in our community who are violent, who are angry, and we need to address this together, because everyone should feel, as I said, safe and valued in our community, and should not feel a target based on any aspect of their identity. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you both for making the time for us this morning in a hectic campaign schedule. Before I wrap up, I will observe that through COVID or otherwise, my kids are fully launched. I don't know who's got the tougher job, Sean with young kids or Angela with a teenager. Having said that, to you and to everyone listening in, have a Shana Tova, a good and sweet year. You may have heard that phrase in the past. I doubt that you've heard this one. To everyone listening in, Gemara Chatima Tova, our tradition holds that on Yom Kippur, which is this week, God seals the book of life for the coming year, and that is a wish that everyone listening in and our panelists be well sealed in the book of life for the coming year. Have a wonderful day, and again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.